All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're opening up a high-stakes historical cold case today. You see, as an honest, hard-nosed legal investigator, you just don't accept claims at face value, right? You have to follow the evidence wherever it actually leads. So today, we are putting a wildly famous historical dossier on the dissecting table, and we're drawing directly from Josh McDowell's landmark work, The New Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Now, McDowell didn't start out as a believer. Actually, he was a massive skeptic who set out to completely disprove Christianity. But the sheer weight of the historical witness testimony, well, it changed his mind. So today, we're putting our investigator hats firmly on, and we're going to examine the historical record with rigorous, uncompromising scrutiny. Let's get into it.
The source we're looking at throws out this really provocative hook right off the bat. What if it was all just a performance? I mean, really imagine it. A man playing a role so absolutely flawlessly that he never breaks character. Not under intense cross-examination, not under brutal torture, and not even when facing his own execution. If Jesus wasn't actually who he claimed to be, then, logically speaking, we are looking at the single greatest, most committed acting performance in human history. The guy would deserve an Academy Award. But as investigators, we have to pause and ask, does the theory of a grand performance actually hold up to the hard historical facts? To figure that out, we've got to lock on to the central premise of the whole investigation. In any good case, you have to find the core issue. The primary question here isn't about what Jesus taught, or how many people he fed, or what good deeds he performed. Honestly, those things are secondary. The foundational question, the one upon which this entire case hinges, is about his true identity claims. Because look, if he merely claimed to be a good moral teacher, you can take him or leave him. But if his claims went further than that, the burden of proof shifts entirely. And this is where we see a huge, stark contrast that the text brilliantly points out. When you look at the historical record of other major religious leaders, think Moses, Buddha, Confucius, Muhammad, they all effectively said, here is the path, now walk it. Right? They pointed away from themselves and toward a higher truth. But Jesus uniquely claimed to be the truth. He didn't just point to the path. He literally claimed to be the path. He claimed an absolute identity of divine authority. Moving right along to Exhibit A, the trial transcript. Let's open the actual transcript here, from Mark chapter 14, straight out of the Sanhedrin courtroom. To understand any historical event, you have to look at the exact charges that led to the execution. Now, during this capital trial, Jesus is largely silent, but then the high priest stands up, cross-examines him point-blank, and asks, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus finally broke his silence and simply replied, "I am." The high priest instantly tore his robes. That wasn't just dramatic flair, by the way. That was a formal legal sign of absolute horror in response to direct blasphemy. The judge literally stopped looking for witnesses because the defendant had just convicted himself. And here is where the text brings in a powerhouse expert witness, Simon Greenleaf. If you don't know the name, this guy was a Harvard law professor who literally wrote the textbook on what constitutes valid legal evidence in the American justice system. We're talking top tier. When this brilliant legal mind examined the trial of Jesus, he testified that the only legal defense for Jesus' conduct in that courtroom was that he was actually God. Literally no competent lawyer could have defended him on any other basis. Furthermore, skeptic-turned-believer Frank Morrison confirms our exact findings. Looking at the trial, the lawyers and judges of the time weren't asking what specific crime was committed. No, the entirety of the proceedings circled exclusively around who this man claimed to be. He was condemned strictly on his own confession of his identity. Which brings us to Exhibit B, the I am claim. Now, as any good investigator knows, exact phrasing and testimony is everything. It matters immensely. In John chapter 8, Jesus makes a statement that nearly gets him executed on the spot. He said, "Before Abraham was, I am." Now, that I am isn't just bad grammar. It traces directly back to Exodus chapter 3, where God reveals his name to Moses at the burning bush. Taking this sacred, unspeakable name was an explicit, legally defined claim of eternal, self-existent deity. He was taking the very name of God and applying it directly to himself. And the source points out something absolutely crucial here. His listeners, they understood the legal weight of this claim perfectly. They didn't pause to correct his verb tense. They picked up stones immediately because to their ears, they heard undeniable capital offense blasphemy. You don't try to execute a man on the street for being a misunderstood moral philosopher. You do it because you know exactly what he is claiming. Digging even deeper into the forensic linguistic evidence, the text highlights another explosive moment in John 10 where Jesus states, "I and the Father are one." When we look at the original Greek language here, the word for one, hen, is neuter. This specifically denotes that Jesus claimed to share God's exact divine essence. And again, his accusers explicitly stated their motives. They were stoning him because he, a mere man in their eyes, was making himself out to be God. The claims were repeated, they were loud, and they were very public.
Let's turn the page to Exhibit C, the worship test. In this phase of the investigation, we're looking strictly at behavioral evidence. See, there's this unbreakable biblical rule across the board: worship belongs to God and God alone. Reviewing the historical record, a crystal clear pattern emerges. When people tried to worship angels, the angels vigorously refused. When someone bowed down to the Apostle Peter, he immediately pulled them up and said, "Stand up, I'm only a man." Every other messenger violently rejected worship. But Jesus, he willingly accepted it. When doubting Thomas saw him and literally gasped, "My Lord and my God," Jesus received it without a single word of rebuke. He accepted what legally and culturally belonged only to God. Okay, time for the cross-examination, the trilemma. The source really forces our hand here into a logical cross-examination. It's an argument made famous by C.S. Lewis. Since Jesus explicitly claimed to be God Almighty, that comfortable modern door of him merely being a great moral teacher, that door is firmly locked. A great moral teacher doesn't falsely claim to be the creator of the universe. So we are left with a strict, undeniable process of elimination. He was a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. Let's cross-examine each one. Let's take them one by one. First, interrogating the liar theory. In any criminal investigation, you gotta look for a motive, right? Liars lie to gain money, power, or comfort. Jesus gained absolutely none of these. He was beaten, mocked, and ultimately crucified. And here's the kicker. He could have recanted his claims at any second to save his own life, but he didn't. Nobody dies in sheer agony for a lie that buys them absolutely nothing. The motive completely falls apart. All right, so we move to the next door. What if he was just completely insane? Well, we have to close the lunatic door pretty quickly, too. When you read the historical transcripts of his teachings, like the profoundly impactful Sermon on the Mount, you encounter this unmatched, piercing, and incredibly calm wisdom. A deluded madman who just thinks he is God does not produce the most profound, perfectly balanced, and enduring ethical teachings in human history. The psychological profile of a lunatic completely contradicts the historical record of his life and teachings. And wrapping back around to that Academy Awards theory we started with, this perfectly illustrates how an actor's standard motives completely fail to match the historical reality of Jesus' sacrifice. An actor plays for applause. Jesus was spat on. An actor wants a paycheck. Jesus owned absolutely nothing. Most importantly, an actor drops the act when their life is genuinely threatened. Jesus held this role all the way to a brutal death. The performance theory simply lacks any logical consistency. Plus, as the source argues, you just do not get 2,000 years of lasting historical impact from a cheap theatrical fraud. Think about it. A play ends when the curtain falls, but this so-called performance has been outlasting empires, mending broken marriages, turning fierce skeptics into staunch believers, and transforming billions of lives across 20 centuries. Fraudulent delusions just don't yield that kind of enduring, world-altering fruit. And that leads us to our final verdict. So, the dossier is complete. We've combed through the trial transcripts, we've heard the expert testimony, and we've systematically closed the alternate doors through hard cross-examination. The historical evidence has been laid all out on the table. He simply didn't leave us the option of calling him just a good man or a nice teacher. This explainer leaves the burden of the final verdict squarely in your hands. You've seen the testimony. So, liar, lunatic, or Lord, which door are you going to choose to walk through? It's a fascinating cold case, and it's absolutely worth investigating deeply for yourself. Keep examining the evidence and see exactly where the truth leads you.